I'm not really a stop and get the mail on the way home kind of guy. I drive right past the mailbox and I allow someone else to stop and get the mail. And some of you don't understand that because you like to get the mail, but let me just give you a little bit of my rationale. I've seen what's in the mailbox. I don't need to get the mail out. I mean, what's in there? It's a flyer from the grocery store across town I don't shop at, right? It's a statement from my bank telling me about a product that I don't want to buy. It's an explanation of benefits from my insurance company telling me why they're not going to pay on my procedure I had done. Or maybe it's a piece of mail from the dreaded Internal Revenue Service, right? Or if you're maybe the unluckiest of souls, you get that dreaded piece of mail that is a jury summons, right? That's the one that we love to see and then talk about to all of our coworkers and everybody complain about the fact that we got it, right? So I know lots of people do not like jury duty. I wonder, how many of you are jury duty people? You love it? Anybody? Okay, there are not many of us. Okay, I understand that. I get why you would not like jury duty. I totally understand. There are reasons that you would want to do something else with your time. I mean, if you've done jury duty and you've had to drive downtown and find somewhere to park, and then you've gone in, you've sat all day, and they've said, oh, we settled the case. You're free to go. It's like, well, I did my duty and I'm crossed off for a few years, but I wasted an entire day, right? And their thank you is an insulting check for your time spent there for the day. I get that. I can totally understand it. But there's another side to that too. I actually enjoy jury duty. Now, I don't have time in my schedule that I would love to go do a really long trial or something like that, but I love seeing the process at work. I like the selection process, the questions that they ask. I like seeing the attorneys and the judges up close and personal doing their thing. I love seeing the law enforcement officers on the stand presenting their case, telling us how they came to the conclusions they did during the course of their investigation. It is all incredible. In fact, I've been on a jury twice. I've been called for jury duty 3 times. The first time I was a youngster. I think I was 22 or so. And I got called for jury duty, and I thought that if I made a joke that I wouldn't get selected. I was wrong. So they asked if anybody had any legal education, and I raised my hand, and I informed them that I had dropped out of business law twice in college. Everyone laughed, and I was selected. Lesson learned, right? You do not do that. I was placed on that jury, and the case was an open and shut kind of deal. And we walked in the room, and no one wanted to be the foreperson. So what did they do? They picked the 22-year-old to be the foreperson of the jury. And I led us so diligently and so effectively and so efficiently that we were a hung jury. It was beautiful. It was a sight to behold. I couldn't lead us to a consensus. I couldn't get us to agree on what we actually heard spoken out loud. It was insane. So the next time I got called for jury duty, I had a little bit of free time in my schedule. I was in a spot in my life that my demands on my career weren't totally all-consuming. And so I tried it again. I made a joke, and I got selected to be on the jury. And I think the other reason they wanted me is because I'd been on a jury, and that was a win. And so I went, and I got in the jury room, and there was video evidence of the crime that was committed. Okay, this is not hard stuff. And they selected me to be the foreperson because I had been the foreperson before, and no one else wanted to do it. And so we did that case, and I was able to lead us successfully to reach the conclusion that we should have reached, and that was a great day. I love the process when it's done up close and personal. And as I share that with people, some people feel a little uneasy about the idea of being on a jury. And I understand some of the whys because it goes beyond whether you're investing your time well. It goes beyond on whether you're compensated fairly. For some people, the real question about being on a jury is if we are qualified to sit with 11 other individuals and determine the guilt or innocence of another person. Am I qualified to administer justice? And I think that's a fair question. And I think it's a question worth wrestling with. And I think it's a question that has an answer that demands us to live it out on a daily basis. This is part 4 of our series called Jesus Shaped Life. We've been in this series walking through, and today we're really nearing the end. If we haven't met before, my name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here at the Summit, and I have the privilege of preparing the plane to land. You know that part, right? You've taken a trip and you've gone through security at the brand new Kansas City International Airport, and you're going to your destination, and they tell you they're going to make their way through the cabin to retrieve any unused service items, and it's time to get this plane landed. That's where we are. Something incredible is about to happen during this season of Lent. All through Lent, we've been remembering and reflecting on who Jesus is and how it changes the way that we live, and we're at this point where we begin to see the end. We begin to understand what is to come and what is on the horizon. Next Sunday, we celebrate Palm Sunday. We'll have a message where we reflect on and remember what it means that the people worshiped Jesus when he came into the city. And then on Maundy Thursday, we remember the servant nature of Jesus as he washed the disciples' feet. And on Good Friday, we remember the crucifixion that Jesus endured on our behalf. The plane is landing, and we're headed towards the incredible celebration of Easter. And we think about the life of Jesus and really the last week that he lived, it shouldn't be surprising to us that he faced adversity. It seemed to happen all along the way. In fact, today we're going to pick up the thread on an average Sabbath with Jesus walking with his disciples. Now remember, a Sabbath in the Jewish culture is Saturday. It's sunup Friday to sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. So the day of Saturday is the Sabbath. That is the time that is set aside, reserved, restricted. In fact, in the first century, there would have been 39 categories of activities that were prohibited during the Sabbath. Are you curious what they are? Here you go. They are carrying, burning, extinguishing, finishing, writing, erasing, cooking, washing, sewing, tearing, knotting, untying, shaping, plowing, planting, reaping, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, selecting, sifting, grinding, kneading, combining, spinning, dyeing, stitching, warping, weaving, unraveling, building, demolishing, trapping, shearing, slaughtering, skinning, tanning, smoothing, marking, all disallowed on the Sabbath. Maybe you're like me and you're like, well, what's left? There's not a lot left on the table here. But there were two things that were left that you could do on the Sabbath. The two most important things. The reason the Sabbath was set apart to begin with. What are those two things? Worshiping and resting. On this particular Sabbath day, Jesus is making his way along a road where there is a field. And something incredible happens on this ordinary, average Sabbath. Because, on the Sabbath, there are 39 categories of things that you can't do. And yet there are things that probably still need to be tended to. Because at some point along the way, you might decide that you want to eat on the Sabbath, right? You've maybe experienced that sometime. Anybody know someone who gets hangry? All right, I live with one, okay? So here's the way things work in our world. Typically, you do not eat the last bite of your meal before you know where the next meal is coming from. This is important stuff. And in order to do that, you plan ahead because you want to make sure that the hanger doesn't take over. And that's sort of what's going on here. I mean, if you're hungry, being busy or being tired or it being the Sabbath doesn't quench your hunger, you still need to eat. And so Matthew chapter 12, verse 1, Matthew tells us the disciples were hungry. Incredible, huh? It's an ordinary, average, kind of basic thing. And the question is, so what do they do? They're walking alongside a field. There's a source of food literally beside them. And the question is, out of the 39 things, is harvesting allowed? It is not. And so what do? This is absolutely incredible. Jesus, in this moment, knowing that people are watching, chooses to meet the immediate need of the disciples. They pluck the grain and they eat. And the Pharisees don't miss it. The Pharisees see it. The Pharisees take note of it. The Pharisees know that they now have just a little more ammunition against this rabbi who's threatening the whole system, who's messing up all their rules, who's refusing to do the things that they think he needs to do. And in verse 14, Matthew writes these words, "But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus." Now, it's interesting that time and time again, Jesus finds himself in places where people are advocating against him. They disagree with him, they don't appreciate him, and they're out to get him. And Jesus, in his strength and in his power, often responds in the most unexpected way. Jesus responds with mercy. The prophet Isaiah envisioned a time such as this. The prophet Isaiah wrote words about the nation of Israel, God's people, about how they would live and behave in the world and what a difference it would make for the people. And these words, no doubt, spring to Matthew's mind. Matthew, who's on a mission to convince the Jews of the day that Jesus is the coming Messiah. He shares the words from the prophet Isaiah, and he says, in effect, this is who Jesus is, the fulfillment of this prophecy about Israel. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 12, verse 18. You can Google that, get your Bible out. It'll be on the screen. Here is Matthew's quote of the book of Isaiah. Here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. If you were just going to summarize the life of Jesus and who he is and what he does, this is an okay place to start, isn't it? He's the servant of God, indwelled by the Holy Spirit, walking the earth, making a difference, proclaiming justice to the people. Jesus is calling out the things that are wrong, and with his actions, he's setting them right. Verse 19. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. I just think this is so interesting. That Jesus' justice isn't articulated by the things he said, but more by the things that he did. See, administering justice, being a person who is committed to justice, is more than saying words. It's more than developing a hashtag and developing a following. Being a person of justice is a person of action who is on a mission to make a difference. Remember when I was a youth pastor 10, 15 years ago? This idea of social justice was kind of bubbling up to the surface. People were beginning to talk about it, and learned about this man named William Wilberforce. The name may be familiar to you. He was a missionary. He was committed to Jesus, and something amazing happened in his life. He was reading the scriptures, and this idea that God calls us to free the captives captured his heart and his life, and he began to live differently from that moment forward. And William Wilberforce's goal in life from that point forward was to abolish slavery. He took seriously the commitment to Scripture. He was doing something that was informed by his faith. And any of us that want to be a person of justice have to pick a place that we're going to start. And the starting point can be doing good for the sake of doing good. But that's not justice. Justice is about allowing your faith and the fruit of the gospel in your life to change the way you live and to challenge the systems you see. See, justice isn't a means to an end. Justice is the end. If we want to see a changed world, it requires a changed heart. A heart that's committed to and sold out for Jesus Christ. That then makes an impact in the world, bringing justice everywhere that there's injustice. So how do we do it? Verse 20. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out till he has brought justice through to victory. The imagery here is stunning. A bruised reed that could easily be broken off and thrown away. A smoldering wick that could easily be extinguished. The justice that Jesus brings doesn't break things. It's not punitive. The justice of Jesus is restorative. It brings things back to the right state that it was originally intended, the way God designed it. On Thursday, I had a sort of memorable day. It was a great day because I worked from home most of the day. I did some work on some Easter stuff. My Easter sermon is pretty much wrapped up and ready to go. It was incredible, but the most amazing thing happened that evening. That evening, I cooked dinner, and it was fantastic. I think I have a photo of it for you here. This is Yukon Gold smashed potatoes, a wedge salad with homemade Thousand Island, and a marinated reverse seared ribeye. Yes, it is as good as it looks. I'll be happy to give you the recipe later, but that's not the point here. The point here is how I cooked this meal. I cooked this meal on my master-built gravity-fed charcoal grill. Now, the idea behind this grill is that you can get the flavor of charcoal with the ease of a pellet grill. And so that chamber on the right, you fill up with charcoal, and there's a little door that opens on the right side where you stick in a little fire starter, and you start the fire starter, and it gets the charcoal going, and it's absolutely incredible. Except when it's not, okay? So it's not foolproof. It doesn't always start like it's supposed to, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time and energy to get it going. So when you stick the fire starter in, you start it. I go inside and I, cut up some lettuce or get the dressing ready or whatever. And I'm getting ready to go back outside, and I go out and I look at it, and it says the fire is still burning at a whopping 32 degrees in the chamber of the grill, right? So here's the thing. In that moment, I have a decision to make, don't I? I can either close the door and call and order pizza, or I can get down on my knees and I can tend to the fire. I can blow on it. I can add a little more fire starter to it. I can get the flamethrower thingy and give it a little bit of a boost. And the question is, what will I do? When it needs help, when it needs assistance, when it needs a nudge, that's where Jesus comes in, and he restores the reed, and he fans the flame that's going out. The justice of Jesus is restorative. It brings hope, and it brings grace. Verse 21. Here's the result. In his name, the nations will put their hope. The justice of Jesus is different than any other justice you'll experience anywhere in your life. Why? Because of the way that Jesus does justice. The justice of the world is about rights and wrongs, and that's important. But the justice of Jesus brings the character of God and adds it to the equation, and it changes the outcome altogether. See, with Jesus, justice is righteousness wrapped in mercy. Let's break that down. Justice is righteousness. Now, as you know, the Bible we read in English is not the original way it was written, right? I mean, thousands of years ago, the Hebrew Bible was written in Hebrew, and then the New Testament was written in Greek and Aramaic. So we have translations of these Bibles. And so oftentimes, if there's a word that's in my mind, something I want to share with you, communicate with you, I'll go back and I'll look at the languages of these words and try to figure out how all the pieces fit together. There are some great commentaries that help with that stuff. And as I began to study righteousness, it became really clear that righteousness and justice are really closely connected. They're inextricably woven together. In fact, the Hebrew word tzaddik and the Greek word dikaiosune basically are translated the same way, justice and righteousness, numerous times in the pages of Scripture. And what you find is that it's the context that it's used in that determines how the word is used. So the word justice would talk about a principle or an ethos or a way of living. And the word righteousness would talk about fixing a relationship or bringing restoration to something that is more tangible. They're both getting at the same thing. It's about rightness in the world. Justice is righteousness. They're deeply connected. And yet, making sure the right is wrapped in mercy. It was Christmas of 2020 when Officer Matt Lima of the Somerville, Massachusetts Police Department received a call to go to the Stop and Shop. Stop and Shop is Hy-Vee, right? I mean, it's a grocery store with self-checkout and the whole deal. And they had received a call that there were some women who were checking out their groceries, but they were scanning only some of the items and yet placing all the items in the bags. And so the officer arrives and he begins to question them. And through the course of questioning, they initially maintained their innocence, but eventually said, yes, in fact, we are taking some of the items without scanning them. The pandemic has been really hard. We can't afford what we were used to afford. It's Christmas time. We're not getting our kids the presents that we typically do, but we're really hoping that we're going to be able to give them an incredible Christmas dinner. So Officer Lima, sworn to uphold the law, does what he is required to do. He writes them a ticket, he gives them a trespass warning, and he sends them outside and asks them to wait. As he's in the store, he makes sure that everything is right with the management at the store, and they're assured that they got back what was rightfully theirs, that everything was in good shape. And then Officer Lima took another step. He walked over to the gift cards and he picked one up and he scanned it and he paid $250 for the gift card before he left the store. When we got outside, he found these ladies patiently waiting for the officer, and he handed them the gift card and sent them on their way down the street to the next Stop and Shop, where they could go and spend $250 to buy groceries to prepare Christmas dinner for their kids. When he was asked about it, he said, I just did what I felt was right. It's not about me. I just tried to put myself in that family's shoes and show a little bit of empathy, righteousness, doing the right thing, bringing justice wrapped in mercy. So often when we think about justice, we simply think about giving people what they deserve. But justice is bigger than that. Justice is about making things right. Pastor and theologian Tim Keller offers this perspective. We do justice when we give all human beings their due as creations of God. Doing justice includes not only the righting of wrongs, but generosity and social concern, especially toward the poor and the vulnerable. Here's what it boils down to. As followers of Jesus, we are to be seekers of justice if we want to live Jesus-shaped lives, because Jesus was a person of justice. Justice reflects heaven here on earth. Justice brings the rightness of God to bear in a way that allows people to put their hope and their trust in God. See, our goal isn't to advance a political ideology or to get a hashtag to go viral, but to live in a way of Jesus, which means that so often when we find ourselves in these situations, we simply have to ask ourselves, how can I express love in this situation? A week ago today, I wasn't here with you. I was out of town, and I received a phone call from my family letting me know that my mom, who was in the hospital, was not doing well. A few minutes later, 20 minutes later, I received another phone call telling me that my mom had passed away. And many of you knew my mom. She served on the Summit Lunch program. She was involved in Bible studies. She sat kind of over here at the 10:30 service, and she was a friend to so many of you. In a couple weeks, we're going to have a chance to celebrate her life. It's going to be incredible. Pastor Jim is going to lead the ceremony. She loved Jesse and Melody, maybe more than she loved me. I don't know. But Jesse and Melody are going to do the music. It's going to be absolutely incredible. And I may have something to say at the ceremony or at the celebration, but as I've been thinking about what that might be, there's this one thing that keeps coming back to my mind about my mom. My mom was a fierce defender of me, even when I didn't deserve it. So here's what you need to know. When I was in middle school, I was a disaster. Okay, I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. I think they had my mom's number on speed dial. And so if you were one of my teachers in middle school and you're here, I'm so sorry. I had a high school teacher at the chapel service this morning, and he told me it was okay and gave me a thumbs up, so I appreciated that. Every time I got in trouble, they would call my mom, and she would come in and sit in the principal's office, or, we'd talk on the phone to her or whatever. And It didn't matter what I'd done, how boneheaded it was, how rude it was, how disrespectful it was. Yes, those things could describe the things I did. My mom defended me. And I know they had to be wondering, how is it that this 12, 13-year-old kid is always right? But I always was in the eyes of my mom. In fact, so much so that I just couldn't seem to find a phone number where they could reach my dad at any time. It was only my mom all the time that they would be able to talk to. And after we'd sit with the principal and she would defend me, or after we'd be on the phone and she would tell them how right I was and how everything was going to be okay, we'd be walking back to the car, or I'd walk in the door at the end of the day and she would say something like, "No more," or "Knock it off," or "Are you kidding me?" or her favorite, "Ryan Lee." And that settled it until the next time. There were consequences, but the righteousness was always wrapped in mercy. I'm just about due for my next jury summons. And when I get it, I will go and I will gladly serve if I'm selected to do so. But I don't have to wait until then to bring justice. And neither do you, because we can take justice everywhere